I am going to start by asking each of you about sovereignty, because one of the things that has always been difficult for me about sovereignty, and we talk about data sovereignty, we talk about digital sovereignty, we talk about AI sovereignty, we talk about digital feudalism, there's all sorts of aggressive and polite terms around it. And often when we have these conversations, we're talking at cross purposes. We're not talking about the same thing at all, and we don't know what we mean. So I'm going to ask each of you, you've not quite sat under your photos, so if that confuses anybody, stick your hand up and I'll explain who's speaking. But I'm going to ask each of you to give me just a couple of minutes on what sovereignty is to you and where openness comes into it. This session, we're going to do 20, 30 minutes of discussion with the panel, and then we're going to open it up to you. So as you're listening to the panelists, please will you be thinking about what you want to ask them, and we'll have a good discussion. So Camilla, can I come to you first?
Sure. So for Mozilla, sovereignty means meaningful choice and control and governance that reflects your needs and your values. And whether you are a person, a business, a nation, that is obviously going to look very different. But open source and open source AI are undeniably powerful tools and critical structural levers to that.
I find that control word interesting. I tend to use dependence rather than us having control, not being dependent on other people, but it's an interesting sort of play on words there. Juliette, can I come to you?
Yeah, so our context is maybe a little bit different. So we're building a small language model for education. And so when you're delivering out education, by default, it has to be culturally, relevant, and it has to be built on the models for that particular country. So when we're delivering, out to India, we have to utilize the Indian educational system just in the same way as we have to do it for the UK. So in order to make it relevant, we have to utilize the open stacks that are already available to us, like Ofqual and NOS in the UK. So yeah, it's very much part of.
Great. I'm going to surprise everybody. JB, haha, I'm out of order. Don't get too comfortable, any of you.
So as you might not know, I was also CTO of a cloud provider in France, right? Which was it's called Scaleway, which is not really a neo cloud, but also trying to have a full AI stack and a full cloud stack, right? And so the problem here is that, like, saying a sovereign AI stack can be so many things, right? It starts from the data center. It's to actually build the data centers. It starts from building the chips, building the AI chips, but everything. Like, we cannot build any computers in Europe anymore, right? Like, we don't have a fab, right? So there are many large investments that are not available, right? Like, building a fab is a $10 billion investment, right? Billion euros or pounds, that's mostly the same. But no one is doing that, right? Like, do we have a GPU that is created in Europe? A CPU? No, we're not there, right? And then it goes from there to, like, the software stack, right? The software stack is what we all know about, right? And what we've been discussing, right? As open source, we've done that, right? Like, all the development frameworks are open source, right? Like, doing something else would be weird, right? Python, PyTorch, Node, and so on. And then you arrive to the part where there is also a lot of value, which is on the models, right? Almost none of those models are open source, right? We have open weight models like Llama, and Meta is forgetting Llama, and the Chinese ones, right? But there is no open source models, almost none, right? They are open LLMs, like, they are a decade away from being state of the art, right? So we have, like, on the two parts where there is the most value, there is chips, computers, and models, and there is nothing as open source, right? And this is a big problem, because it's not just a question of autonomy, dependency. It's also a question of value, right? Like, the most important and value and money is fleeing to the US or to China. And us Europeans, whether we are inside the EU or outside of the EU, it's the same problem, right? Is that we are basically putting our money and sending it away. And if we want to keep our European way of life, which is amazing, right? Like, we need to keep value inside and not get the highest value somewhere else. So that's the biggest question around there. And so far, we have all the middle ground, the software part, but not the parts that are the most interesting and the most valuable today.
Thank you for calling us European here in the UK, because people forget that all the time. It drives me nuts.
But like, you are, right? Like, if
no.
You are. Like, come on, like you are, right? If you look at how you live, like, you live closer. Like, you have cities, right? Right? You're not in the US, right? You can do things without a car, right? Like, the way... No, but like, come on, like...
High walkability score.
Yeah, but like the way you live, whatever you are, well, it's closer. And like, you don't like chlorinated chickens, right? Or almond beef, right? But this is what you fear, right? And that's what you are. And you have the same problem, like, it's a geopolitical problem. Sorry, but like, I'm sorry for the American friends here. They're not your friends.
But we have a special relationship.
Oh, that's bullshit.
Everybody has that.
That's
what do you mean?
That's bullshit. Like, the US consider the UK and, or the British Isles or like as a place where they can sell their products and you're a dependency. The same way us Europeans from the continent use our colonies a century ago, like a place where we could like extract value from, right? Like, this is the truth, right? No, people don't like that, but this is what is happening today, right? And this is a big problem. And even on open source, it's a big problem, right? There is Linux Foundation and almost nothing else, right? Like, even there, right? The thing is, we need to know and to understand that we are not fully aligned with other countries. And the UK, in general, is more aligned with Europe, even if bullshit political things don't happen.
That's a technical term for anybody that's not sure.
No, but like it's important, right? Because it's a question of way of life. It's a question of, like, what is the most important in your life? In being happy, being, like, having a work-life balance that makes sense?
Football.
Soccer, yes.
Oh, you American.
But like, this is what is important, and if you see the way you are and what you care about your way of life, you need money to sustain this way of life, right? And people in Europe, in the EU, I don't know how it's in the UK, have a lot of difficulty understanding that you need to have money in order to sustain this way of life. And for that, AI is a big change, and there is a lot of value, and you cannot just like hand over the largest values to the US, who's not fully aligned with your life, even if you hoped it was. We've seen that it's not. And I've talked too much.
Thank you, and I've let you go on longer than I should, but everybody else will get the same opportunity to speak. I was interested in your mention of Linux Foundation, which is the preeminent foundation in open source, and MCP, created in London, has ended up in the Agentic AI Foundation, which is a subset of Linux Foundation, despite being created in the UK. The first thing on the agenda in China 8 years ago, and I have tracked this closely for 8 years, I've been in China twice in the last 18 months. I was privileged to actually get to speak to someone from DeepSeek for about an hour while I was there. And the first thing they did was build their own foundation, OpenAtom. And a slight aside, but if we want to have whatever our sovereignty means, we need the infrastructure that supports that technology in the ecosystem. And we will make sure it's on the loop outside and in my closing wrap. There is an OpenUK 6-page document, which is a condensed version of what we did last year for UKRI, which explains our recommendations to the UK if it really wants to be that leader and what it has to do. And everything we do there, we're doing because we think every country needs it. It's not just because the UK needs it. And number one on that list is building our own foundation, building somewhere that we can host our open source projects and collaborate. And I expect personally that in my lifetime, I will see every country with its national foundation using that as the basis for its sharing its funding of open source and its global collaboration. So it won't be a nationalistic independence thing, it will be the basis of global collaboration. Sachiko, you've waited patiently a long time. You've just got your very own open source policy after decades. Congratulations.
Yes. Do you want me to still talk about digital sovereignty, or have we? Yeah.
Yeah, let's stick with it.
Because we spent a few years in Brussels talking about precisely what is digital.
Sorry to interrupt you. That open source policy is a subset of the sovereignty work, right?
Yeah. So if you want to get into details of the communication, so the Commission just released this week a communication from the Commission which was accompanied in the same document by an open source strategy. It also mentions two legislative proposals and an energy digital transformation of the energy sector roadmap. And so those things still need to go through Parliament and Council. So we have proposals on the table, but we don't know what the final outcome is going to look like. But the strategy is a document that has been adopted by the Commission and is now a document that we can refer to and will stay in this kind of state. But I still wanted to talk about
But it's been decades in the making. You'll get there, you'll get your turn, don't worry.
Yeah.
It's been decades in the making, this strategy.
When I saw this document, it was almost, I can tell you that it was published. We had, most people I think had access to a leaked draft a week or so in advance. But then once it had been published, we had organized with some other groups a conference call to discuss what was in the proposal. And I remember having almost it was almost anticlimactic because, it's like where you're ready for a fight, and then it is giving you everything that you have asked for 20 years. You know what I mean? Everything. And we're going to have a master's program. And we're going to have a fund for maintainers. We're going to have an OSPO network. We are going to, it just lists everything that we have. I think I've been part of some studies for the Commission, one that we did in 2021 with Fraunhofer, some of the policy recommendations there. It basically, in this strategy now, the Commission seems to have endorsed all of this, the ecosystem approach to open source, etc. But of course, it's almost like, okay, what are we going to discuss? What are we going to fight for? And that makes me, there's always something, because they are also putting money on the table, for example. They're putting 2 billion euros on the table just to implement the open source strategy over the next few years.
2 billion?
2 billion euros for the open source strategy part. But there's also other open source aspects in the legislation relating to the Cloud and AI Development Act. So that's also going to be, they have KPIs, they have everything, But of course, what happens there is that you start thinking about other times that we have celebrated. Let's say, I remember there was the Tallinn Declaration, there was the Berlin Declaration, where there's the Global Digital Compact, where they are basically, all the governments of the world have said, by 2030, we're all going to, build our public services on collaborative open source. And then you realize that if you don't have if we don't have the skills, if we don't have the awareness when this actually has to be turned into practice, then we've seen legislation in some individual member states of the European Union, for example, where they basically mandated open source in procurement, and not much happened, right? Because there's always a box you can tick.
Camilla, just give me one
There's
second.
always a box, unless
I'm going to come to you.
Unless it's impossible, and apparently it was always impossible.
There is a piece around that where Justin Cormack gave me a row last night for a LinkedIn post I made because it wasn't clear enough. And in some ways that made me sound old-fashioned. And he was right, and I take that on board. We have an old-fashioned open source first policy here in the UK in our public sector, which was published in 2011-12.
Yeah.
And some of you with me were on a Cabinet Office committee that advised on that. And I know because of that policy and law alone do not create the infrastructure you want, which is why we're pushing for this foundation model beyond the OSPO, and why we hope everybody else will shift to that over time. And I think if you look at the German Sovereign Tech Agency, which started as a fund, you can see their gradual steps. and getting to that. I'm not patient, so I want the UK to go to the end point straight away, but they are building towards that in my view. Camilla, sorry.
Well, I think you've said it more elegantly than I was going to. I was only going to say that I agreed it was a landmark moment for Europe, and it's going to be so helpful because for people like me, when I talk to policymakers in the past year, Amanda's right, it has been a steep learning curve. I got a lot of, well, that's nice, dear, but you're not really very serious, are you? Like, this is a bit of a hippie hobbyist, like, it's not serious. And that's partly because open source often does not look like the things that government is often used to talking to. And I was only going to say that while I'm really happy to see the strategy come by, and it is down to all your amazing work and all the other projects out there, it's going to increase policymaker interest in open source. It won't necessarily increase their understanding. And there's so much more education and upskilling work that has to be done.
A serious politician in London who had a call with me about open source, who kept cutting me off when I was trying to explain the back end because they think they understand it, and it's detailed. They told me they'd been with the German ambassador that week, and they didn't mention open source. Germany must be second in Europe to us. I'm going to keep saying that. But Germany has so much going on, and they're actually way ahead of us when it comes to businesses. They have more small open source businesses than anywhere in Europe. Juliette, you've been a little bit quiet, so I'm going to come back to you. Tell me a bit more from your perspective on sovereignty about the way that you see skills and people engaging with this. You run an education business, you are building a small language model. Tell me about how that fits with sovereignty for you and openness.
Well, I mean, we sort of came to, trying to build Zavmo, which is our small language model, through the kind of reality that, every country has its own way of educating its people. Now, there's lots of similarities. And so, what we wanted to do was offer education to everybody in a low-cost way, but at an individual level. So essentially, what we're trying to do with Zavmo is ingest these huge data sets, which are available at European level. They're available, India, most places, other than US, funnily. So ingesting these huge data sets, making sense of what best practice looks like in, all subject areas, vocational and skills. We then sort of backward engineer job descriptions and skills so that we can create hyper-personalized learning experiences. And, what that effectively means is that if you are an individual, you do not want your conversations with a learning, LLM to be anything other than private. If you are a teacher, or you don't want, or the student is not going to want to have that information, fully available to the teacher. And likewise, as you kind of move up the stack, so from the student to the teacher, to the school, to the region, to the country, you just need to make sure that data, keeps as private as it possibly can. So that's really where we sit.
Yeah, we were at the AI summit in India, these global AI summits. You probably remember Rishi Sunak set the first one up at Bletchley Park in the UK about 3 years ago. And OpenUK did a lot with the open source community in India. Some of the people here, Camilla was there. And Kanishka Narayan, the AI minister, made the video I showed you this morning with us to premiere at the High Commission at their party there to show his support for open source and AI. And we talk a lot about the infrastructure. President Macron got on the stage in the keynotes, and what he talked about was how France had done the right thing with Mistral. I'll be interested in your opinion. And India had done the right thing creating Sarvam, which is a small language model because they have different needs, but ultimately, both in theory at least, are open. So when we talk about that openness, there's this whole separate question about data that I'm sure we'll have audience questions on and we'll come back to, because I don't think the India Summit or anything I've seen really deals with data sovereignty in the right way, but maybe other people think differently. Camilla, I'm going to come back to you. We talked in India about the work you were doing around the AI stack and openness. Do you want to sort of delve into that a bit for us?
Sure. I should preface before I answer this, though, just to give a bit more context, because I realize that Mozilla is a very vast organization. And so I work in the bit of Mozilla, the sort of extended universe, that has taken as its North Star the idea that Mozilla needs to do for AI what it did for the web. And so we are deploying millions into the open source AI ecosystem in lots of different parts. And if you want to talk to me about that after this, please do. I would love to chat. And in addition to that work, I help out on the AI policy and advocacy for different parts of Mozilla, such as the venture fund, the AI enterprise platform, our AI startup, and lots of other different parts of Mozilla. And so there's lots coming down the track. There's lots that's about to be announced. A lot of it I can't talk about, which I'm really sorry. It's not really what you want to hear from someone who's sitting on a panel. But what I can talk about is a report that we are about to release in July called the State of Open Source, a report which we hope to be an annual report. And in that, we're going to map the whole of the AI stack. So what's out there at the moment, what's competitive, what's quite weak in the stack, what is there, but it is a bit cumbersome to use. And it also involves a survey of over 2,500 developers around the world. And if any of you in the audience has already been part of that, thank you very much. And so some of those...
Did you cut the data by country? Can I get the UK data?
You can, absolutely. I don't have the cross breaks yet.
You've not got it on you?
No, just not on me, no. But we will have them soon. And so we're doing this report for lots of different reasons, but one of the reasons is we want to use it to think about where we actually focus our resources and where we think about where we can actually be helpful in sort of strengthening the ecosystem and strengthening the stack. And some of the things that are coming out of this report, our sort of initial findings are, this is not a values problem, this is a UX problem. And so model capability is not the bottleneck, it's the deployment burden and complexity that is. And it's the difference between having, saying, well, here's a model, and here's a production-ready system that you can install, run, and maintain. And I shall only say that I think that is where Mozilla thinks that we can actually be helpful in that, when you make open source easier to use, you're going to make that tipping point far, far more likely. And I think it would be a crying shame if we had sovereign solutions out there, but a lot of people couldn't use them because they were just too complex. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. That's where we sit.
And I feel in a way that what goes around comes around. Back in the day, some of us remember, back in the day, we were knocking on doors trying to get open source into businesses, and it was a nightmare. And it was a nightmare because all the risk professionals blocked us, the lawyers, the procurement, the finance people who had to sign off on contracts. And then GitHub came along and circumvented it. And people started to take their code directly into organizations, and those risk professionals were bypassed. I expect there will be a moment, and maybe it's what you're building, but I expect there'll be a moment in AI that will shift it. But what we see in the research just now is that it's like the old days of software, where there isn't enough AI adoption of the OpenAI or AI that's openness. If only they hadn't called OpenAI, right? It would be so much easier for all of us. So, JB, you've been around longer than me, despite your youthfulness.
I'm old.
Tell me a bit more about this balance, because I don't like sovereignty, right? Because I think sovereignty is an aggressive term.
Yeah,
I think it's about me being local and living in my own little place and not you.
So if you often come to my conferences about this sovereignty subject, like my introduction is sovereignty is absolutely catastrophic word, right? Because it comes from the Latin super annus, which calls you back to Middle Ages, right? Where you move from like one chief to another chief, right? And you're like actually serve to someone, which is true today, right? Like the sovereignty is American, right? You're basically slave to the Americans.
So say that again and slow down. You're going too fast. Sovereignty is What was that last bit about the Americans?
Not a zero-sum game.
No, it is
I hate
not.
that
But
phrase. I don't even really understand the zero-sum game.
so it's better to use the terms of digital autonomy, right, and digital independence, right, because that means that you're going to have like several multilateral world, multilateral providers, and this is what we've been doing in open source since forever, right? Like you had so many non-profits, and we've been fine with having KDE and GNOME and XFCE with having like 2 or 3 different stacks, right? And so we need to have that, right? Because like AI is going to be everywhere, and not everyone has the same needs, right? You will need to have like very simple models, and I believe that we're going to see a ton of new small models for voice, for translation, for OCR, and for all those tasks, right? And so those giga, tera models are very difficult to run, right? And this is one of the reasons, right? Running Opus is difficult, right? You need 400 gigabytes of VRAM, right? Which you don't have often, right?
Speak to Adrian.
Yeah, I know, right? I've been doing that at Scaleway, right? Also, I know that, right? So, and RAM is expensive, and we don't have a RAM fabric in Europe, for example, right? And we are not building one also, right? Which is also another problem. But the thing is, what we need to learn from open source, and open source is the only way to have a sovereign, independent, autonomous stack, right? Because this is the way, either you have a ton of money and a ton of advance, or you use the bazaar way of the open source, where a ton of things are being built and the best ones emerge, right? And this is a great thing, which is a bit Darwinian, right? The best way of open source is that the best things prevail in the end, right? And we've seen, for example, like TensorFlow with PyTorch, right? No one is using TensorFlow anymore, almost, right? And there were a few other ones, right? And so the best stacks come, right? Like no one would do a server on the internet not running Linux, right? Like, and because of that, right, what we need is federations, right? Digital autonomy, right? And like the UK will have some needs that are a bit different from France. That's okay. And different from Germany, that's okay, right? But there are so many things that are in common, and by being a lot of people working together, we can go faster, or at least catch up our lateness, right? We're behind around 10 years later, late on many of the sovereign AI stack. Then arrive the 2 biggest issue, which how do you train new models, right? And like you have 5 companies in the US building models, 3 in China, basically, right? And you have 1 European, which is Mistral, until it's not European anymore, right? Until it will get bought by either the US investors that are in Mistral or Middle East countries, right? So it's a big problem, and there are not enough emerging players around that. What I see that is a lot different is that for a lot of politicians, AI is linked to open source. I have no idea why. This is completely not true, but that's great for us, right? Like, they consider AI, they see AI is going to change everything in a very short time, right? In 5 years, there is a lot impact on most of the jobs that are in Europe, sure. And they see that the open weight models are open, and so they link that to open source. That's good for us, right? Mm-hmm. So we can use this momentum to build things and to do an open AI stack in order to catch up where we are. But it doesn't solve the big question about large models and building chips.
So for me, and I'll let you go on because I know how eloquent you can be on this topic and where you were going, but for me, there is this challenge where we start to talk about localization, and I sometimes call it local source. When people want to take what the open source world has built, bring it to their country, make it their sovereign version, and then not give back, because actually what they wanted to do was to create something so very, very localized. I'm not going to let you answer me. You can answer me in a minute, because Sachiko is chomping at the bit and has been for a while. So I'm going to come to Sachiko and then come back to you.
Okay. Very patiently.
Yes,
chomping at the bit.
Yes,
Okay.
of course, extraordinarily patiently.
Yes. So what was the question now, Amanda? Mm-hmm. Or I can go back to the original question.
You wanted to interject. There wasn't a specific
question.
No,
it's just like, I think that there's a kind of, I think for me, again, you know, you don't want to, I've been talking about open source to policymakers for 20 years and gone to conferences like this, and you don't want to be somebody who says, oh, okay, we tried that, nothing works. I think there is a momentum. There is more understanding, but I think that what I don't want is 2 billion euros being handed out through some kind of complex process for us to build something that could have made us digitally sovereign, 5 years ago, right? It's about if we, and I've seen, this is not something that I saw somebody refer to this. If we are investing now, we have to invest in the digital sovereignty for the future, not putting 2 billion euros into making local versions of whatever technology we are depending on today. That's not how we build a stronger Europe. And I personally think that when we talk about sovereignty, and I can also go back to at least the Treaty of Westphalia or something like that. I mean, is it control over territory? If it's control over territory, then this is zero-sum game. I think that digital sovereignty, or being more aware at least of your dependencies, understanding what and have some strength that also is kind of complements other, partner strengths. That's the kind of thing I'm hoping that Europe can move towards. Understanding, where our dependencies are, where our strengths are, and how we can, consciously build, our technological future.
Yeah.
And so, if we approach some kind of definition like that, then my sovereignty doesn't sort of impinge on somebody else's sovereignty. And I think that I think you mentioned India and some other countries as well. In Brussels, you get the feeling that it's only Europe kind of fighting for, against China and US, right? And there's a whole world out there. Everybody's public sector, every citizen's data should be, how can I say, they should have sovereignty over their own data, things like that. Countries should be sovereign, citizens should be sovereign, and in an ideal scenario, that doesn't mean that we are moving towards everybody having 100% control. Because, in fact, if we look at the individual level, if you control everything in your environment, your environment, it shrinks very quickly. And that's what I don't want Europe to do, is to kind of put some money on the table now, start to focus on our technology in isolation, because I think it will make us weaker. And then in some way, we also we are weakening also our sovereignty, because
I'm going to, unless anybody really has a burning, I need to jump in now, so tell me. I'm going to come to the audience and see if we've got questions. What I'm going to ask you, please don't be offended, keep it short, make it a question, not a statement. Give me your name, your organization, and a question in like a couple of sentences, so that we can get through as many contributions as we can today. Who's got the mic? Can I see you there? So there's a gentleman in a white t-shirt in the middle there. And then there's somebody up the back left there with his hand up. Hi.
Hi there. Federico Pizzuti from Huawei, UKRD. I have a question for the last thing that was just said, because there is a bit of I'll just get to the question. When we think about sovereign in a non-zero-sum setting, and we think about our dependencies, are we assuming that in the non-zero-sum setting, we are going to become someone else's dependency? That is a necessary point. That is, we are going to be needed. Or is it just about kind of being collaborative, but not...
Perfect. We've got it. So can we also take the question from the back so that we... And please introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Stephen McCullough from NatWest Group. How do we ensure sustainability within sovereignty, with there being growing concerns over value creation globally from AI and the continued cost investment to create the infrastructure that supports it? So bringing those two together, we are looking to the panel to discuss with us how we create a sustainable environment through sovereignty, and how we create sovereignty that doesn't just shift where the dependency lies from them to us.
Who would, Sachiko,
Oh,
you get
just
to be
because
first.
the question was about something I had, the first question at least. I think that's a really good point. In a way, like, do you have something to trade, right? You don't have to make everything. This is just fundamental economics. You don't have to be self-sustaining. You have to be good at something, and that's something somebody else wants to trade with you. But I think that the whole point, and I think this is a good development, that we are becoming aware of these things. And we can also identify other partners, that's also mentioned a lot in Brussels as well. But, to take that further, you look at Korea, look at Japan, other countries, and see that they are also waking up to this notion that they have to, that maybe they are dependent on something that can be weaponized. But, if you have something that somebody else needs, that creates some kind of security. And you have to be aware of that, and maybe you shouldn't be making everything yourself, but you should have a kind of, yeah.
Because of my Brexit experience of sovereignty, I didn't want people to talk about it, and I tried to close down conversations when they first started because I don't like it. And JB, I don't like it because I'm part of a globally collaborative open source community that cannot function, or it could, but it won't be open source, on geographical silos. And that's always going to be my big concern. So historically with software, we would build a stack, which Nick talked about, a vanilla stack effectively, and you put your flavors on top. Is that possible? Is that where we're going? How do we balance this? Picking up on your, so that we can answer your question.
Yeah, it's like one of the things I have to fight against in many of the open source communities is that they don't want to use AI, right? Because in so many, like, let's call it old-fashioned open source communities, which I come from, and I know a few people from the audience also, right? They don't want to use AI because blah, 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 it's not deterministic and so on. The thing is, one of the cool things with AI is that it allows you to code things faster and also to customize them faster. And this is actually important, is that if you want to customize something for a specific locale, right, it's a lot easier today than it was, right? Because if you want to extend, right, doing a small extension, which only makes sense in your country, in your group of countries, in even your region or your language, it's a lot easier, right? So the thing is, it's a bit weird, right? I'm doing the opposite, which is like you need to use AI to have better open source and get faster, right? And this is also very important because then, well, you want to do something that is only for one country, that's okay, right? And it also means that with AI-assisted coding, right, there is no project that is too costly, right? In the past, you would say, oh, I have this idea for development, and then you went to your group, and the CTO has had 6 months of development, we don't have the time. This doesn't exist anymore, right? You're going to fire up Claude, and you're going to do something in 5 minutes, right? If I want to vibe code an app for just this conference, which is a few days, right? It's doable, and it's going to take me a night, right? So one of the cool things with AI-assisted coding, which is a very specific thing, is that it's going to be easier to do open source for a lot of geographics, a lot of cases that were not sustainable before or too costly. To go back to sustainability, I think it's also, which was a question over there, it's also interesting is that we need to have companies doing open source, and they need to be sustainable. The
Holy Grail, it's always been the problem, right? How do you make money? The money that you were talking about before.
I know, I've just raised $5 million with VCs to create a new open source.
Are you interested in sponsoring our awards?
No. Maybe next year, yeah, sure. But the
Please
thing
make a note of that, somebody.
Sure, but like there are ways, right? And the thing is, as you just said, right? There are things where open source is actually at the edge, right? And the place where you are at the edge and have the most values, right? You need to find those two things, right? Are the places where there is actually money, and this needs to, need to have the frameworks to have companies who are doing open source and funnel that to the rest of the ecosystem. Because it's great to, as you said, like to focus on what you're good at, but you need also to focus on what you're good at and has a lot of value, right? Because this is how you're going to put money inside the whole ecosystem, so that you have a lot of alternatives that fits your need, and if you need, you can have your independence.
And to stop that money all going into a small space with everybody throwing money at the same space, we really do need to collaborate at a state level as well as at business level. Camilla, Juliette, would either of you like to come in on those questions?
Well, I misunderstood the sustainability one. I thought you were talking about environmentalism, and I had an answer for that. So no, I'm good. Thanks.
It's a very confusing thing that we talk about sustainability in that way, and then we talk about sustainability in the other way.
Well, also because the open source strategy from the EU does talk about sustainability in a way that I think is really unhelpful environmentally. But anyway, cool.
The only thing I was going to add is that speaking from a more kind of commercial context, because that is the world that I live in, I would say that one of the ways that we can break out is developing small language models, because, they're easier to train and they can deliver what the UK economy needs in smaller kind of bite-sized chunks. So I see that as we might not be able to have our own LLM, but we can, double down on verticals and, be world-class in that.
Yeah. I'm just going to go back to the audience. There's a lady here in a striped top who has a question. There's a gentleman at the back and a gentleman here in grey. We have 8 minutes, so I'm going to go to the gentleman at the back because he's got a mic. They're bringing you a mic. We'll get these 3 questions in quickly, so please keep them short and punchy.
Okay. Hey, so.
Oh, it's a lady. I can't even see.
Yeah, I'm in the far back. I love it.
My apologies. All I can see is light.
I really liked earlier in the discussion where we were getting to understanding, and in tribal nations, we are sovereign nations in the US, but we are quite literally defined as dependent nations. Mm-hmm. That's the legal definition. We are not allowed to have an army, and we have co-functioning infrastructure with the US. In digital sovereignty,
Sal? Huh? I need to hurry you to the question. Is there a question?
In digital sovereignty, because you don't have the ability to fab all the way onward, how are you going to handle sovereignty as a effectively dependent nation?
Okay. I think what you're saying about nations within the US is probably something that a lot of Scots will relate to. Lady, have you got your mic? There we go. And sorry, and where was the gentleman here with the grey hoodie? So please keep it short so we can answer.
Oh, absolutely. My name's Paula Wilkie. I'm from the public sector. We know about open source companies, skill development Scotland. We also know about education. My question is sovereignty is not new. We all had on-prem servers. Then somebody thought about the cloud. What I'm trying to understand here is AI has come out. The biggest boon to open source that I can see. Why are we now having a conversation about sovereignty and open source? How do you reconcile that is 2 different things?
So because governments is the simple short answer in my view, but we'll come back to that in a second. Let's just get this question over here. Thank you.
Hi, Martin, collaborator, but also volunteer at Reuse Charity.
And now lives in my hometown.
Possibly more on that front. I've had the opportunity to talk to MPs recently around the use of Linux to allow us to use old hardware and stuff longer. Bridging the gap between the way we speak and the way they speak is difficult. What type of tips can you give us to bridge that gap?
So work with us, because that's what we are all about and that's why we exist, and we've been doing that transition. We have a group of policy people who specialise in convening the right people and converting difficult technical concepts into understanding that they can meet. So I even have a picture of a pizza that I define the tech sector with, because they understand that. And I consistently got told that I was too technical when I thought I was completely dumbed down. I think one of the things we do differently is bring people like these together. We bring together the technical people, the business people, the policy people, and most organisations don't bring them into the room with the politicians. So I've given my responses, which I shouldn't really have done. Who would like to jump in on those questions?
I can jump in on
Camilla.
the gentleman's question. I do this all day, every day, and let's chat after this, but all I would say is that you just have to focus on what the politician is trying to achieve and work out how to match the answer immediately to what can I give you.
And I think we also need to collaborate more on this, because the fact that we're having so many distinct conversations with them doesn't necessarily help us. So we need to be joined up in the background. Sachiko, did you want to? You look like you do.
Was the question about that that you see a tension between sovereignty and open source? Actually, we're kind of assuming that open source now is at the heart of the of a EU open source tech sovereignty strategy. But you're saying there's a fundamental tension there, in the sense that if we think again about sovereignty as having control over something, ownership of something, then to some extent open collaboration. You don't own it, you don't control it in that way. So I think that we do need to have a definition of sovereignty that does not mean that we own and have full control over everything, but it's a kind of sovereignty that means somehow through something.
So
rather,
I'm just going to pick up on what you're saying. I have for a long time said I hate sovereignty for exactly the reason you're asking that question, right? I want us to be globally collaborative, and I'm fighting for us to keep being global citizens, working together to build that technology and not close it down. However, if you think about it in terms of dependency and not being dependent, it's not really about the underlying technology. It's a bit, but it's really about not being dependent on other companies, in my view, companies from other countries, so that you've got that ecosystem, but there's no reason that underlying technology can't be globally collaborative. And if those companies know that you don't want to be dependent and that they'll lose money if that's their model, they will shift, and they will shift over time to opening things up with the people procuring from them, in my view. Sachiko, I'm going to let JB come in because he's not managed to say anything.
I'll give you a very simple example, right? Like Scaleway is a European cloud provider. It's probably one of the only one who has almost all the products that you need, from bare metal to PaaS and even inference as a service, right? So if you look at the scope, there is like 90% of the products that you use that are most used on AWS and GCP. It's done by 300 engineers. It's impossible, right? 300 engineers is basically what you have just in the storage part of AWS. The thing is, in Scaleway, almost everything is open source. Everything that we use is things that are open source, right? And so the fact they are open source projects, you need to glue together. There is support, there is business, and so on. Like Scaleway is doable with 300 engineers when you need at least 10 times that size or 100 times that size. And this is because you have part of the stacks that are open source, from VLLM to Python to the Linux kernel, right? And so the thing is, it's a very good example on how you can create business around Europe to achieve cloud autonomy, right? Digital autonomy. And this is because there is a ton of open source projects, right? And for example, I can know the parts where there is no open source project on the AI stack because I've implemented them, and I can tell you that. And this is why open source is so important, because this is the only way we can get to being sovereign in a time constraint and a cost constraint that makes sense.
That's perfect, thank you. I hope we've covered your questions. We now have 50 seconds left. So I am going to allow each panelist one sentence, and don't be breathing and making it a big long sentence, on why sovereignty and open source matter. Who am I coming to first?
Okay, I start. We can do it.
We can do it. Sachiko. Come on, instinctive.
No.
You can't do it. JB already, Sachiko can't do it. What are we going to do?
Somebody else can do it.
Somebody else can do it. Yeah, it's JB. Camilla.
Trump.
Oh, geopolitical shift. Juliette, you can have the last word.
Goodness gracious. I mean,
don't mess it up.
Yeah, I know, pressure, right, pressure. I mean, in the world that, that I live in, standards and, are the beginning and the middle and the end. And so unless, the application...
That was an and. Standards are the beginning, the middle, and the end. Open standards are the beginning, the middle, and the end for AI regulation, AI governance, and the basis for our global sovereign collaboration as we keep open source, not local source. Ladies and gentlemen, join with me in thanking the panel.